Hello everyone, and welcome to my Sister Wives For You channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The complicated dynamic between Janelle Brown and Kody Brown has been unraveled for years by Sister Wives viewers, but nothing prepared them for the moment when Janelle finally lost it. All of the pent-up emotions, the silent suffering, and the years of neglecting her children erupted in a raw and fiery outburst that could be summed up in two simple, unfiltered words: F you. This was more than a brief argument or outburst between husband and wife. It was decades of unappreciated sacrifices, innumerable instances of her children being shut out, and the heartbreaking insight that Kody's love, care, and energy had been directed toward just one branch of his large polygamous family, while Janelle's children were left to fend for themselves without the kind of fatherly guidance they sorely needed. Since the beginning of Sister Wives, Janelle has presented herself as the practical wife who controls her emotions and concentrates on raising her 6 children: Logan, Madison, Hunter, Garrison, Gabriel, and Savannah. However, as the seasons went by, the marriage began to fall apart, and it became more and more obvious to both Janelle and the audience that her children were suffering the most as a result of Kody's unpredictable decisions and patchy participation. Viewers remember how frequently Kody disregarded the hardships of Janelle's boys, especially Gabriel and Garrison, who publicly criticized him for his hypocrisy, his fixation on Robin's family, and his refusal to show all of his children the same love and respect. These incidents weren't isolated. Rather, they were indicative of a much larger pattern that left Janelle feeling bitter and defending her kids like a lioness, while witnessing the man who was meant to be their father abandon them when they most needed him. The worst aspect of this neglect was exposed during the pandemic, when Robin's children were protected, consoled, and seemingly given priority over Janelle's children. In this environment of partiality and strained family relationships, Janelle's patience started to erode as Kody imposed strict rules that seemed to be selectively enforced and disproportionately punitive toward Janelle's children, particularly the sons who dared to question his authority. The more Kody retaliated with haughtiness and self-righteousness, the more it became clear that Janelle was done enduring her suffering in quiet. Fans vividly recall the times when Janelle stood her ground during family conversations, demanding justice for her kids. While Kody used power selectively, portraying himself as the victim while creating the conditions that alienated half of his family, Janelle realized that she had carried this marriage for far too long, sacrificing her own needs and her children's sense of belonging. This was not just a disagreement about parenting styles that Sister Wives captured. It was a symbolic breaking of chains. It was the result of years of internalized anger, a statement of self-worth, and, perhaps most importantly, a defense of her children against a father who had continuously put ego before empathy. Her famous F you moment wasn't vulgarity, for shock value. Audiences were reminded of every instance in which Janelle's children felt invisible: Logan's forced adoption as a surrogate parent when he was barely older than a child, Hunter's emotional distance as he tried to win Kody's approval, Gabriel's tears over the absence of his father during his milestones, Garrison's scapegoating for disobeying Kody's pandemic orders, and Savannah's quiet and reserved upbringing with the painful realization that her father's love always seemed conditional. This was a mother standing up for her children, who had endured years of silently bearing the burden of being the forgotten branch of the Brown family tree. It wasn't just a mother advocating for herself. Janelle's children had to learn resilience without their father's active guidance, unlike Robin's children who were pampered and at the center of Kody's emotional world. Her rage was a reflection of every time she watched her children beg for scraps while another household enjoyed their father's love. The world heard truth, the release of years of suppressed grief, and the voice of a woman who would not tolerate her children being treated disrespectfully for even a single instant when she finally uttered those 2 scathing words. Fans of Sister Wives applauded Janelle's unvarnished honesty since it revealed the brutal reality of favoritism, neglect, and the emotional damage it left behind, shattering the facade of polygamous harmony that Kody formerly so boldly promoted. Instead of marking the conclusion of her story, Janelle's breaking point marked the start of her independence, and the changing of a page in which she put her own dignity and the welfare of her children ahead of Kody's domineering narrative. The truth was evident to millions of people, despite Kody's attempts to portray himself as misunderstood and unfairly attacked. Janelle had gone through enough, her kids had gone through enough, and the F.U. that rang out wasn't just aimed at her husband, but also at the years of gaslighting, manipulation, and neglect that characterized her marriage. Conversations among fans about the price of polygamy, the unequal division of emotional labor, and the tragic fact that children frequently suffer the most when adults fail to show up with constancy and love were sparked by the aftermath from that moment, which extended beyond the family. Because of her intense love for her children and her realization that keeping up the appearance of a healthy plural marriage was far less important than safeguarding them, Janelle's decision to eventually confront Kody was one of survival rather than defiance. That fiery declaration will therefore live on in the history of sister wives, not as a tirade of obscenities, but as a rallying cry for every mother who has ever seen her children marginalized, for every wife who has ever carried the emotional burden of a family alone, and for every individual who has ever had the guts to declare, after years of suffering, that enough is enough. What makes Janelle Brown's breaking point so powerful is not only the fiery words she delivered to Kody in that explosive moment, but also the years of build-up, the endless cycle of sacrifices that went unrecognized, and the emotional scars left on her children as they grew up in a household where love was not distributed equally, but rationed according to favoritism and compliance. And when Sister Wives first introduced audiences to the Brown family, Janelle stood out as the steady, level-headed wife, the one who avoided drama and kept her head down while ensuring her children were taken care of. Yet beneath that stoic exterior was a woman absorbing every slight, every dismissal, every instance where her children's needs were deprioritized in favor of Kody's obsession with control and Robin's comfort. And as the years unfolded, that steady composure began to crack, revealing the deep frustration of a mother who could no longer sit by as her family was treated like second-class citizens. When Kody's strict and selective rules forced Janelle's boys to make difficult decisions during the COVID-19 pandemic, forcing them to either isolate themselves from the outside world to conform to his standards or face being labeled disobedient and rebellious, the world witnessed the ugly truth. Kody's hardline stance was more about protecting Robin's household than it was about protecting the family, leaving Janelle's children estranged, heartbroken, and resentful of a father who claimed authority without demonstrating compassion. Fans were especially moved by Gabriel's emotional collapse, in which he sobbed uncontrollably as he talked about how forgotten he felt and how agonizing it was to watch his father disregard milestones and birthdays while demanding respect in return. That heartbreaking scene became a symbol of the negative effects of neglect. Instead of ranting mindlessly, Gabriel was expressing the anguish of being hated in a family that was meant to be based on equality and mutual devotion. Janelle, seeing her son suffer, knew that she could no longer remain silent. As young men who worked tirelessly to forge stable futures for themselves, Hunter and Garrison also bore heavy burdens. They both felt the sting of a father who only seemed to get involved when it was convenient for him, and their tense relationship with Kody became representative of the larger dysfunction. When sons stood tall and spoke truth to power, Kody retreated, shaming them rather than seizing the chance to mend what had been damaged. Therefore, Janelle's breaking point was not just for herself but also for these kids: Logan, who had taken on the role of a second father since he was a teenager; Madison, who grew up knowing that her father was not always there; Savannah, who silently suffered the loneliness of being ignored; and Gabriel and Garrison, whose relationship with their father was tainted by partiality and hypocrisy. Every fan who saw Janelle's outburst realized that those two words, F you, were not just aimed at Kody but also at a history of erasure, a statement that the years of neglect had finally reached a point where there was no turning back. While Kody tried to fabricate stories, accusing disrespectful wives or disobedient children, the audience realized that Janelle's truth was supported by indisputable evidence. Instead of stepping up, Kody retreated deeper into Robin's embrace, severely hurting her children, who were cries for recognition rather than rebellion over sport. Fans' perceptions of the Brown family were altered by the fallout from Janelle's breaking point, which revealed that polygamy, at least in this household, had broken down due to ego, favoritism, and strained allegiances. Kody held on to the idea of patriarchal authority, but Janelle broke it when she refused to allow her kids to be denigrated any longer. Her suffering struck a chord with viewers, especially women, who identified with her struggle, the never-ending juggling act of raising children while their husband emotionally checked out, and with Janelle's last outburst, which was the release of years' worth of suppressed anger. More than just multiple marriages, Sister Wives has always been about power, love, inequality, and the price of picking one partner over another. In this case, the price was Janelle's children, who learned to be resilient without the steady affection of a father figure who ought to have been their fulcrum. Fans didn't just applaud Janelle's strength when her anger erupted. They demanded accountability, accusing Kody of years of manipulation and gaslighting. Although he attempted to spin the story as one of disrespectful children rebelling against their father, the truth was clear. His neglect caused a rift that could not be healed by any number of excuses. Though Kody may continue to defend his decisions, the world has already witnessed the truth through Janelle's eyes and her children's tears, and the FU moment will always remain a cultural touchstone in Sister Wives lore, a reminder that mothers will eventually speak up when their children are harmed, that silence has its limits, and that truth, once spoken, cannot be unheard. The memory of that moment is a monument to every woman who finds the fortitude to eventually scream, "Enough." Her breaking point was not simply the culmination of her narrative. It was also the start of her journey toward liberation and her unwillingness to be silenced any longer. The impact of Janelle's famous breaking point extended far beyond a single heated argument in a living room because, in reality, it was the shattering of illusions and the pulling back of a curtain that had long concealed the dysfunction in the Brown family dynamic. Although Kody tried to minimize the confrontation or portray himself as a victim of disloyalty, viewers knew they had witnessed a once-in-a-lifetime moment of raw authenticity on reality television, the precise moment a woman who had given up her entire adult life for the stability of a plural family realized she could not and would not allow her children to be marginalized any longer. The impact of those two words, FU, continued to reshape the storylines, fan discussions, and even the show's legacy. For Janelle's kids, that outburst of candor was more than just a dispute between their parents. It was confirmation that their mother understood their suffering and was prepared to risk everything, including the marriage she had faithfully maintained for decades, in order to defend them and say what they had been yelling for years. Even silent Savannah, who hardly ever spoke up, could see in her mother's anger that her loneliness mattered. Garrison, who had been portrayed as a rebel, suddenly had someone in his corner reminding the world that he was more than a caricature, and Gabriel, who had cried on national television about being forgotten, suddenly had a mother who refused to let that reality go unnoticed. Because Sister Wives had long been a program based on Kody's meticulously constructed story about polygamous harmony and fairness, fans also felt freed by Janelle's candor. However, Janelle's breaking point demonstrated that harmony was a myth and that fairness had never really existed, and that once the truth was spoken, it could never be silenced. In the larger context of reality TV, the explosion stood out as one of the most genuine and unforgettable unscripted moments of all time. Viewers on social media platforms celebrated Janelle as a warrior mom who had finally stood up after years of abuse, and the explosion became a cultural flashpoint for discussions about motherhood, favoritism, and toxic relationships. Fans couldn't ignore the anguish on his kids' faces or the determined expression in Janelle's eyes when she said she was done keeping quiet. As the dust settled, it became evident that the FU wasn't simply a conclusion but rather the start of a new chapter in which Janelle regained her voice, her authority, and the dignity of her kids.